So in the previous video, we talked about the structure of the skeletal muscles. We looked at the internal parts. And I just want to focus a little bit about this thing called the myofibril. And the myofibril has this kind of pattern, right, of dark and light, which I've mentioned before. Now, in reality, the myofibril is something that encompasses the entire skeletal muscle width and length. And if I were to remove the nucleus and the mitochondria and the T-tubule, the myofibrils can actually cover the entire breadth of the cell, as I'm showing you in this diagram here. So the nucleus, mitochondria are all still present. I've just not included them in this particular diagram, as you can see. So, like I said earlier, the myofibril forms a pattern of dark and light areas. And if I were to show you a transmission electron micrograph of a skeletal muscle, you can see that is taken using a TEM, transmission electron microscope, and you can see the pattern of the myofibril as well. Now, what exactly is this myofibril? The myofibril is actually the contractile units, which means to say that this is the part of the skeletal muscle that does the actual contraction. How it does that, we will look at that in the next video. This is just looking at the myofibril. And the myofibril, as you can see here, it has those patterns of dark and light. So that part where I'm circling forms the dark area. I hope you can see that based on the actual diagram as well. And I'm also circling the light area to compare it. Yeah, of course, it's not aligned very beautifully, my diagram and the actual picture of the skeletal muscle fiber. But I hope you can appreciate that even in the transmission electron micrograph, you can see the patterns of dark and light. That's the first important thing, you have to see that. Now the question over here is as follows. Why exactly are some parts of the myofibril dark and some parts of it light? Now the reason for it is, okay, I'm going to take out one small part of the myofibril, just cut it open. You can see dark and light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw it out in a more, I'm going to magnify it and just draw out another simplified approach of it. Now you can see that the dark areas and the light areas actually have those lines, and those lines are called the protein filaments. That is why people associate proteins to muscles, because a lot of times students will say, oh, we need proteins to build muscles. Yeah, I mean, you need proteins for a lot of things, but muscles require a lot of proteins as well, because the myofibril contain these things called the protein filament. In reality, the reason why some parts of the myofibril is dark and some parts of the myofibril is light is because of the thickness of the protein filament. So when the protein filaments are thicker, that causes the area to actually look darker, and when that part of the myofibril is thinner, it causes that area to be lighter. So if a question asks pertaining to the myofibril, why are some parts dark and some parts light? You just have to say that the darker parts have thick protein filaments known as myosin, and the light area of the myofibril has thin protein filaments called actin. And you need to remember the names of the filaments, okay? Actin filaments are the thin filaments, myosin filaments are the thick filaments. So if I were to just look at the picture again, so look at the part of the actual TEM of the skeletal muscle fiber. So that part is dark. So the dark areas over there have myosin filaments, which are the thicker filaments, and the lighter areas have actin filaments, which are the thin filaments. That is why the pattern of dark and light emerges in the transmission electron micrograph. So this is the first thing that we have to understand about the pattern of the myofibril. The other things to know about the myofibril are as follows. We have these things called the Z line and the M line. The Z line are just this perpendicular structure that runs along the actin filaments and it holds the actin filament. The M line is just a structure that holds the myosin filament in place. That's basically it. Another important thing to also know is the distance between the two Z lines, okay, between one Z line and the other Z line, that is known as the sarcomere. So as you can see in this diagram over here, if you can see in this diagram, the lighter areas, which I've circled in green, those two are the light areas, and that line running perpendicular to it is known as the Z line, right? That one's also the Z line over there. But in the dark area, you can see a line running perpendicular to the whole thing. That is the M line. There we go. And of course, the distance between the two Z lines are known as the sarcomere. Now, the reason why we have to talk about this is because when we study the contraction of muscles further in detail in the next video, the Z lines will be more important to be explained.